The king who gave up his crown for a commoner's love introduction, history is filled with stories of kings who fought wars, built empires, or ruled for power. But few stories touch the heart as deeply as the story of King Edward VIII, the man who gave up the British crown, one of the most powerful thrones in the world, for the woman he loved. His decision shocked the world. In a time when kings were expected to serve their country above all else, Edward chose love over duty. His choice changed British history forever and remains one of the most romantic and controversial acts by any ruler. Early life of the king. Edward VIII was born in 1894 in England. His full name was Edward Albert Christian George Andrew Patrick David. Quite long for a young boy. He was the eldest son of King George V and Queen Mary, which meant he would one day become king. From childhood, Edward, often called David by his family, was charming, handsome, and confident. People loved him. He had bright blue eyes, a warm smile, and a lively personality. As he grew older, he became known as the Prince of the People because he easily connected with ordinary men and women. However, behind his charm, Edward often felt trapped by royal duties. He disliked the strict royal traditions and wanted to live freely, not just follow rules. Becoming king when King George V died in January 1936, Edward became king at the age of 41. His official title was King Edward VIII, and the world celebrated his coronation. Newspapers printed his pictures everywhere, calling him a modern king for a modern age. But soon, the royal family and the British government faced a serious problem. Edward was in love, and his love was not acceptable to the monarchy. The woman who changed everything. The woman who captured the king's heart was Wallis Simpson, an American woman who lived in London. She was elegant, intelligent, and confident, but she was also divorced and married again. When Edward met Wallis, she was still married to her second husband. Despite this, the two quickly became close friends, and their friendship soon turned into love. Wallis was very different from the noblewomen Edward had met before. She made him laugh, understood his feelings, and treated him like an ordinary man, not a king. For the first time, Edward felt truly happy. Love versus duty. However, their relationship soon became public, and it caused a scandal. In the 1930s, the Church of England, which the king was also the head of, did not allow divorced people to remarry if their former spouse was still alive. That meant Edward, as king, could not marry Wallis Simpson because she was twice divorced and her second husband was still living. The royal family, the government, and even the church strongly opposed their relationship. The British Prime Minister, Stanley Baldwin, told the king clearly that if he married Wallis, he could not remain on the throne. Edward was torn. On one side was his duty to his country, to be a king, a symbol of tradition, and a leader of his people. On the other side was his deep love for Wallis. After months of emotional struggle, Edward made a decision that would shock the world. The abdication on December 10, 1936, King Edward VIII signed official papers giving up the throne. This act is called an abdication, when a king or queen gives up their crown voluntarily. The next evening, on December 11, 1936, Edward gave a historic radio speech to the British people. His voice was calm but filled with emotion. He said, "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king without the help and support of the woman I love." It was one of the most famous speeches in modern history. The king of one of the greatest empires in the world was walking away, all for love. After the speech, his younger brother, Prince Albert, became the new king and took the name King George VI, the father of Queen Elizabeth II. Life after the crown, after giving up the throne. Edward was given a new title, the Duke of Windsor, He left Britain and lived for many years in France with Wallis Simpson, who became the Duchess of Windsor after their marriage in 1937. Their wedding was small and quiet, without the royal family's attendance. Many people thought Edward would regret his decision. But despite criticism and loneliness, Edward always stood by his choice. The couple lived a glamorous but somewhat lonely life in exile. They traveled often, attended social events, and met world leaders. However, they were never fully accepted by the royal family or British society. The world's reaction. The world was deeply divided by Edward's decision. Some people saw him as a romantic hero, a man who gave up everything for true love. Others saw him as a selfish king who abandoned his country during a difficult time. Many newspapers called it the greatest love story of the 20th century. It was the first time in modern history that a monarch had chosen personal happiness over royal duty. His decision also changed the British monarchy forever. If Edward had not abdicated, his brother George VI would never have been king, and his daughter, Queen Elizabeth II, would never have become queen. In their later years, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor settled in France, living in a beautiful villa near Paris. Though they had wealth and comfort, they lived mostly away from the royal family. Edward occasionally returned to Britain for family events, but was always treated as an outsider. Despite this, he remained devoted to Wallis. When he grew old and ill, she stayed by his side, caring for him until his death in 1972. After his death, his body was brought back to England, where he was buried near other members of the royal family. A sign that, despite everything, he was still remembered as a king. Wallis lived another 14 years after him and passed away in 1986. She was buried beside him, and on their shared gravestone were simply engraved their names and titles: the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Legacy: the story of King Edward VIII is remembered as a tale of love, sacrifice, and courage. Few people in history have made such a powerful personal choice against the expectations of the entire world. Edward gave up the British Empire's throne, a symbol of immense power, wealth, and tradition, for a woman who was not accepted by society. Whether people see him as foolish or brave, his act proved that love can be stronger than crowns and kingdoms. The impact on the royal family and Britain, Edward's decision to give up the throne, shocked not only the British people, but also his own family. His mother, Queen Mary, was deeply upset. She had always believed that royal duty came before everything, even love. She loved her son, but she could not understand why he would give up his responsibilities for a woman who had already been married twice. His younger brother, Prince Albert, who became King George VI, was never prepared to be king. He was shy and often struggled with public speaking, suffering from a stammer. Still, when Edward stepped down, Albert had no choice but to take on the crown. His wife, Queen Elizabeth, later the Queen Mother, supported him strongly, and together they helped rebuild the people's faith in the monarchy. Although George VI and Edward remained polite to each other, their relationship became distant. The new king and his wife quietly disapproved of Wallis Simpson. For many years, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor were kept away from royal events and official visits. Even Queen Elizabeth II, Edward's niece, treated her uncle respectfully but never closely. The wounds in the royal family from Edward's decision took generations to heal. The world during Edward's time, it's important to understand the time period in which Edward made his decision. The year 1936 was not just about love. It was a time of global uncertainty. Europe was on the edge of war, and the British Empire was struggling to maintain peace and stability. Many people believed that a king's duty was to lead his country through difficult times, not to walk away from the throne. For this reason, some people saw Edward's act as irresponsible. They felt that his personal feelings should not come before the good of the nation. On the other hand, many ordinary people secretly admired him. They thought it was beautiful that a man as powerful as a king could love so deeply that he would give up everything. The crown, the palace, the title, just to be with the woman he loved. His decision created debates all over the world. Was Edward foolish or brave? Was he weak or strong? The answer depended on how people saw the meaning of love and duty. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor's life abroad, after the abdication, Edward and Wallis lived mostly in France, but also traveled to the United States and other parts of Europe. Their life was glamorous, full of parties, fine clothes, and famous friends. However, behind the glitter, there was loneliness. Edward missed his country and his family. He often tried to find ways to serve Britain again, but the government didn't trust him. During World War II, he was sent to the Bahamas as governor, a way to keep him away from European politics. Even though he no longer ruled, Edward continued to represent royal style and grace. Wallis became a fashion icon, admired for her elegance and poise. Together, they appeared on magazine covers and in news articles. Yet, in private, they lived a quieter, more isolated life. They had no children, and in their later years they mostly kept to themselves. A love that changed. History Edward VIII's abdication changed not only his own life, but the entire future of the British royal family. If he had remained king, Britain would never have had King George VI, and his daughter Elizabeth would never have become Queen Elizabeth II, one of the most respected monarchs in modern history. This one act of love, a man choosing his heart over his crown, altered the line of succession and shaped the next century of British history. Over time, people began to see Edward's story differently. Some historians called him the Romantic King, while others believed his decision was selfish. But no matter how people judged him, his act remains unforgettable. It showed that kings, like ordinary people, also face emotional struggles and must make painful choices between duty and love. The meaning of his choice. Edward VIII's story teaches an important lesson about the power of personal choice. While most kings are remembered for battles or achievements, Edward is remembered for something far more human: his heart. He lived the rest of his life without a crown, but with the woman he loved beside him. And even though he lost his kingdom, he gained a kind of peace that power could never bring. In the end, his story is not just about royalty or history, it's about love, sacrifice, and the courage to follow one's heart, even when the whole world disapproves. Conclusion: the story of King Edward VIII, the king who gave up his crown for a commoner's love, remains one of the most moving tales in history. His choice changed the monarchy, divided his country, and inspired countless books, movies, and songs. But beyond all that, it reminds us that even kings and queens are human beings. They may wear crowns, live in palaces, and rule nations, but inside, they have hearts that can love, break, and dream, just like anyone else. Edward's legacy lives on as a symbol of true love's strength, a love powerful enough to shake the foundations of an empire, and a man brave enough to say, "I would rather have the woman I love than the throne of the world."